There is an activity so common, so constant, and so silent that few realize how deeply it interferes with the energy they carry each day. It requires no physical effort, makes no sound, and is invisible. Yet, it quietly drains vital power entrusted to you by God. Thinking excessively has been normalized, even romanticized. But when thought is unobserved, it becomes a restless stream that fragments attention, accelerates the inner system, and begins distorting perception. In many cases, this interference isn't even consciously noticed. It doesn't always appear as a direct symptom, but as a subtle vibrational block. Your field of energy does not respond only to outer actions. It responds, above all, to the quality of the inner information flowing through it. And when that information piles up without pause, when thought turns to noise, it produces an energetic overload that disturbs harmony. Quantum Aligned reminds you here, mental clutter is not harmless background. It shapes reality. The disturbance may not seem obvious at first glance, yet it appears as mental fatigue, difficulty staying present, and a sense of mismatch between what is sought and what is lived. Many wisdom traditions describe the mind as a tool, necessary and powerful, but dangerous when it seizes control. Thought, when mistaken for identity rather than passing content, stops being neutral. The more one clings to personal thoughts, the harder it becomes to notice there is something beyond them, a stillness held by God's infinite presence. Excessive thinking doesn't just create confusion. It fractures the field, alters vibration, and blocks higher levels of clarity, perception, and magnetism. And the harder one tries to fix this by more thinking, the tighter the field constricts. The mind insists on occupying all the space. But space itself sustains transformation, not physical distance, but sacred inner space where divine guidance can emerge. Without awareness, there is no pause between one thought and the next, no recognition that not every mental fragment deserves pursuit. Understanding how overthinking affects your energetic field is a key step on the journey of self-knowledge. Reorganizing your vibration doesn't depend on controlling the world or even controlling the mind. It depends on realizing how long the mind is run on autopilot. When that excess is brought to awareness, a quiet shift begins, a subtle alignment with the life force God continuously provides. Thinking is one of the mind's most basic functions, but few ever ask what thought truly is. Through thought, decisions are made, experiences interpreted, and realities shaped. On the surface, it seems a string of ideas, images, words, memories, and projections. Look closer, and you'll see thinking doesn't happen purely by deliberate choice. It happens by pattern. Thoughts are rarely created fresh. They're repeated. They arise from records, memories, old interpretations. And most surprising of all, this repetition happens constantly. The mind has been trained like an ever-watchful system, comparing, judging, and predicting, even when no threat or problem exists. The activity continues from habit, conditioning, or impulse. This automatic motion turns thought from a useful tool into uninterrupted noise. As this noise grows, it starts being confused with direct perception. Often it becomes impossible to separate thought from reality. What's perceived is only a mental image, distorted by past experience, fear, or expectation. This is where interference begins. Because that noise, far from harmless, emits a vibration that influences your surrounding field. Every mental frequency shapes how energy moves through the body, the field, and the world. Fast thoughts destabilize fields. Repetitive thoughts generate dense fields. Negative thoughts fragment structure. The more intense the activity, the less room remains for intuition, perception, or higher states of presence, the very channels through which God's wisdom whispers. Even neutral thoughts, daily tasks, routine worries, simple reflections, when endlessly repeated, create informational overload that blocks harmony. Clearly, the solution isn't eliminating thought or condemning it. It's recognizing the role it plays. Used consciously, it becomes a servant. Unwatched, it becomes a master. In that state, the mind doesn't observe, it reacts. It anticipates, retrieves old data, and projects it onto the present moment. This pattern is ancient, familiar, and rarely questioned. But familiarity doesn't make it natural. Feeling inevitable doesn't make it permanent. Mental repetition is not a mirror of the present, but a residue of the past. That's why overthinking doesn't merely slow growth. It severs you from real experience. When the mind is too busy interpreting life, it cannot fully live it. As a result, your vibrational field drifts from alignment with the now. Returning to presence is not about force or control. It's about remembering that God sustains every moment and leaves room for clarity beyond noise. As Quantum Aligned often reminds viewers, gently pausing, breathing, and creating inner space allows the divine rhythm to recalibrate your energy. If this resonates, like and subscribe so this channel's guidance continues reaching seekers like you. Because every pause you honor invites more light, more harmony, and more truth into your field. It resonates with fragments of what has already been lived, and that makes it unstable, reactive, and blocked. Inner clarity cannot emerge when the sacred inner space is saturated with noise. That is why the first step to restoring energy is not thinking differently, but noticing how much thinking occurs unnoticed. When that becomes visible, reorganization begins. The energy field exists before words, before thoughts, and even before action. It is dynamic and directly shapes how we feel, how we perceive the environment, and how events seem to unfold under God's unseen order. In many spiritual insights, this field is understood as a vibrational extension of consciousness. Though it cannot be measured by common instruments, it can be perceived by those who cultivate sensitivity. The field carries information, and that information does not arise solely from the body. It also flows from the mind, the emotions, and above all, the quality of inner states repeated through time. Every person emits a frequency. That frequency is not fixed. It shifts, adjusts, strengthens, or weakens depending on what is happening within. And this is where thought plays a decisive role. The field does not respond only to external events. It responds primarily to what is sustained internally. What is thought often replayed silently and not surrendered. Recurring thoughts act like subtle transmitters. The more the same mental content repeats, the more it solidifies as an energetic pattern. The more solid that pattern becomes, the more it shapes the experiences that manifest under divine orchestration. That is why situations repeat, and why sensations persist even after environments or routines change. Because the field is not fueled only by outer actions, but by what the soul consistently holds inside. Thoughts, especially unconscious, repetitive, and reactive ones, carry far more vibrational weight than we realize. Constant thinking acts as a blockage. It disrupts the field's flow, distorts sensitive perception, and attracts experiences that match the vibration it emits. A field overloaded with compulsive thoughts becomes dense, fragmented, and unstable. This instability isn't visible, but it is felt as irritation without clear cause, lack of focus, uneasy sensations, or disconnection between desire and reality. In more harmonious states, the field flows with lightness, clarity, and coherence between intention and manifestation. But when excess thought dominates, flow is replaced by resistance, as if something unseen is always obstructing experience. The quality of energy we emit directly shapes the people, path, and situations we encounter. And this quality is deeply tied to how we handle our thoughts. Disorganized or tense thinking creates interference not only internally but externally. The energy becomes reactive, the field loses coherence, and with that, It loses the ability to attract aligned experiences that God's wisdom continually offers. Quantum aligned exists to remind seekers of this truth. Essentially, what vibrates manifests. If what vibrates comes from thought, then how you think becomes one of the most active forces in manifesting your reality. The main cause of overthinking is not thought itself, but identification with it. The issue is not having thoughts, it is believing those thoughts define who you are. This identification is the root of inner overload. The mind does not merely think, it fuses with what it thinks. Few realize there is a difference between what we think and what we are. When a thought appears, it is often assumed to be true, necessary, and part of a fixed identity. From there, a cycle begins. The thought generates an emotion. The emotion reinforces the thought, and the energy field responds to that pattern as if it were reality. Yet thought is not identity. It is passing content subject to change. The consciousness that observes thought is stable, held by God's steady presence. It is precisely this observing capacity that breaks the cycle of identification. Without observation, the mind seizes control of experience. If insecurity arises as a thought, it isn't simply seen, it is lived as truth. If a doubt appears, it isn't questioned, it is felt as a warning. This becomes the dominant vibration. After all, the field responds to content, not objective events. Identification with thought is subtle yet powerful. It builds a layer where everything passing through the mind is absorbed as self. In that state, the energy field vibrates reactively, not from higher consciousness, but from a mental narrative replaying in that moment. Ask yourself, how many of your thoughts genuinely arise from the present? And how many are echoes of what was lived or what is feared? The energy field does not differentiate between present and memory. It responds to what is active now. And if what is active are conditioned, automatic, and unconscious thoughts, that becomes the dominant vibration, even when the external world offers no reason for it. Recognizing this pattern is the first invitation to return to the present. And if this insight resonates, support Quantum Aligned with a like or subscribe so this message of awareness can guide more seekers toward clarity. That's why presence is so essential to break the cycle. It's necessary to acknowledge that thoughts exist, but so does the one who observes them. That observer does not need to react. They simply perceive, and this quiet perception begins dissolving the rigid structure of thought as identity. When consciousness assumes the observer's place, the mind loses its grip. The thoughts don't vanish, but they become lighter, less urgent, less absolute. When thoughts aren't observed, expressed, or understood, they remain active, not in conscious awareness but in the energy field entrusted to you by God. Thought doesn't end when it appears. It leaves a subtle imprint. When repeated frequently, that imprint becomes a pattern. That pattern begins operating automatically, influencing vibration even when the original content is no longer consciously present. This is how mental accumulation forms. Recurring thoughts, fueled by old interpretations and memories, become fixed as delicate vibrational structures, staying active until they are seen. Much of what feels like emotional weight, resistance, or instability is the direct effect of old thoughts still alive in the field. Most of these thoughts weren't deliberately created. Many are inherited, absorbed, or copied. They arise from family stories, cultural conditioning, childhood experiences, or even collective energy. This means not every thought you carry was chosen. But if it repeats within you, it shapes your field. And if it shapes your field, it also shapes how reality is experienced. As explored on Quantum Aligned, a field overloaded with accumulated thought tends to vibrate in a fragmented, dense, repetitive way. Consequently, it attracts situations mirroring that density. That's why it's common to feel trapped in the same cycles, even after changing habits or surroundings. The mind tries to solve these patterns with more thought, searching for explanations, justifications, strategies. Yet mental accumulation doesn't dissolve through cognitive effort. It dissolves through conscious awareness. When a thought is observed clearly and without judgment, it loses power. As its strength fades, it begins releasing from the field. Lack of involvement is what undoes fixation. This is why the practice is not eliminating thought, but interrupting the impulse to get lost in it. The more a mental narrative is fed, the more fixed it becomes energetically. What exists in the field only loses force when it is no longer being fueled. The first step toward that release is noticing what is being sustained, and how much of it is carried from habit, repetition, or unexamined acceptance. To reorganize the field, it's vital to recognize what is occupying space. And to recognize it, you must observe, because only what you are willing to see becomes visible. One of the biggest misconceptions on the journey of internal reorganization is believing the goal is to stop thinking. This belief creates tension because the more one tries not to think, the more they become trapped in controlling the mind. Control in this case doesn't lead to freedom, it leads to conflict. Thought doesn't need to be forcibly stopped. It only needs to stop being the center of the experience. When we speak of silencing the mind, we are not seeking to make the mind disappear. What is sought is not a total absence of thought, but the creation of inner space where thoughts can arise without dominating. It's an internal shift, moving from the role of one entangled in mental content to the role of one who observes that content without being captured by it. The goal isn't stopping the movement, but transforming the relationship with it. When that relationship changes, the inner experience changes. Thought remains, but it no longer fills every corner. It doesn't define the moment. It simply passes like any other phenomenon, sustained within God's greater flow. Inner silence manifests through a radical change in how thought is experienced. What quiets the mind isn't suppressing content, but recognizing thought as a temporary phenomenon. When that recognition stabilizes, thought no longer generates inner friction, and the field stops reacting as if every mental event were a threat or an urgent call to act. In this state, emotional entanglement with thoughts begins dissolving. The mind continues functioning, but it no longer demands constant attention. Noise loses urgency, and the compulsion to react softens. Within this spaciousness of non-involvement, the capacity to simply perceive arises. Perceiving without reacting is what sets the energy free. This kind of silence happens naturally when there is sufficient awareness to interrupt identification. The habit of following every thought as absolute sustains the noise. What dissolves it is clear, direct, non-resistant observation. As Quantum Aligned often reminds its viewers, cultivating awareness allows the divine rhythm to reassert itself in your life. This inner release is not merely psychological, it's a shift in frequency. The energy field responds immediately when the system stops operating reactively. Energy begins flowing again. Tension eases. The nervous system slows. And consciousness, freed from unnecessary noise, can finally occupy the space once monopolized by the mind. In this renewed spaciousness, the subtle guidance of God becomes easier to sense, like a quiet current beneath the surface of thought. To keep these insights flowing to seekers everywhere, like and subscribe to Quantum Aligned. Your small gesture helps this message reach others ready to reclaim their energy, silence their noise, and reconnect with a presence that sustains all. In the quiet space held by pure awareness, free of conflict, excess, or resistance, the state many describe as flow naturally unfolds. Flow is the effortless harmony between who you are, what you're doing, and the present moment. It's the seamless meeting of inner movement and outer action, where life itself moves without strain, overthinking, or interruption. In this space, perception and action merge like two currents joining into one clear stream. Contrary to common belief, flow isn't reserved for artists, athletes, or creators. It isn't tied to a specific talent or discipline. Flow can emerge in the most ordinary situations, while washing dishes with full presence, walking through a familiar street without mental chatter, or listening deeply to a friend. What unites these moments is the same ingredient, the release of mental control. Flow doesn't come from forcing outcomes. It arises from conscious surrender to what's happening now, free from the fragmentation of excessive thought. Energetically, flow is a state of high coherence. Your vibrational field reorganizes naturally. Energy circulates with ease. Vitality rises, perception sharpens, and what once felt heavy begins to move. Intuition becomes clearer, and synchronicities, those meaningful coincidences, start appearing more often. Life feels lighter, not because thoughts vanish completely, but because they no longer dominate your inner world. In flow, the mind still operates, but as a supportive partner rather than disruptive noise. Thoughts surface but don't interrupt. Choices are made without struggle. The body responds with intelligence. Time seems to slow, and you sense without doubt that you are exactly where you're meant to be. This alignment happens when your field is uncluttered enough for energy to follow its natural path. And for this clarity to remain, excessive thinking must return to its proper place, as a tool, not a tyrant. When the field stops reacting to old mental patterns and starts resonating with consciousness, perception opens to subtler dimensions of clarity. But sustaining this state requires more than brief glimpses of presence. It calls for commitment to your own frequency. This frequency isn't strengthened by future achievements or perfect environments. It grows in the way you inhabit this moment and, most importantly, in how you respond to your mental movements. Observation is the key. To observe isn't to analyze a thought or build elaborate explanations around it. Observation is direct, neutral, and immediate. You notice a thought arise, and instead of chasing it or resisting it, you let it exist without transforming it into action, reaction, or identification. This simple act opens genuine internal space, a subtle, almost physical sense of relief, as if something inside expands and breathes. When awareness is no longer absorbed by thoughts, it becomes a stabilizing force. Your vibrational field, once reactive, settles into harmony, not through effort or control, but through the absence of conflict. Creating this space isn't dramatic or outwardly visible. It's a quiet, consistent practice. Each moment of conscious observation weakens automatic mental patterns. As you repeat this, the nervous system softens, the body relaxes, perception widens, and your energy begins to reflect a new frequency. Importantly, you don't need to abandon daily responsibilities or adopt elaborate rituals. What matters isn't the form of the practice, but the quality of your attention. Meditating for a few minutes, walking with full presence, or taking 3 conscious breaths while noticing passing thoughts, all are gateways to cultivating this inner state. Even something as mundane as drinking water can become a moment of awareness if you let it. Still, no technique surpasses the power of pausing, observing, and choosing. At every moment, you have choices: to stay entangled in mental noise or to stand the observer, to feed a thought or allow it to pass, to react habitually or notice the impulse before it becomes action. These small, repeated choices shift the foundational frequency of your experience. They don't just alter what you feel, they transform what you emit. Your energetic field begins to reorganize around this new clarity. What was once automatic becomes optional. What was unquestionable becomes visible in a new light. As perception sharpens, your inner field grows lighter, and presence transitions from a conscious effort to a natural way of being. In this expanded state, a different vibration emerges, one free from the old patterns that once governed your reactions. The coherence we're speaking of isn't an abstract concept. It's something you can sense in daily life. Situations align with less struggle. Conversations flow more easily. Decisions demand less effort. A quiet order begins to shape your experience because your internal frequency is no longer at war with itself. This shift isn't about erasing thoughts. It's about dissolving the struggle against them. When the fight ends, all the energy once spent on resistance, suppression, or control becomes available again. That release alone can transform your vibration. Your body feels lighter. Your breath adjusts naturally. And life, without the weight of unnecessary mental noise, begins to flow. Intuition sharpens. The field begins to function as it was always meant to, receptive, steady, and deeply connected. At this stage, insights often arise on their own, not as answers you chased, but as quiet revelations that surface from stillness. This happens because the space created by observation allows subtler layers of consciousness to speak, layers once hidden beneath the noise of thought, now finding a field ready to receive them. This frequency cannot be forced. It is a reflection of presence itself, emerging when the mind no longer dictates the pace of your experience. Control softens into trust. Worry about the future dissolves into the clarity of now. As inner stability takes root, the outer world begins to meet you differently, not because reality has changed, but because the vibration through which you engage it has. This frequency does not depend on a constant feeling of bliss. You need not be endlessly positive. What sustains coherence is clarity, the ability to notice inner movements without being swept away by them. With clarity, even heavy emotions move through without disorganizing the field. They pass. They are acknowledged, processed, and released. This is how energy continues its flow, without hardening into reactive patterns. Freed from its struggle with thought, the field becomes a clearer mirror of consciousness. It stops repeating old echoes and begins to express something aligned with a higher intelligence present in the moment. As this vibration steadies, your experience of reality shifts, not through miracles or spectacle, but as the natural outcome of deep internal reorganization. From this grounded vibrational state, life unfolds with greater clarity, grace, and integrity. But stability does not maintain itself. It asks for care, for attention, for a quiet kind of responsibility to keep your field clear, observed, and open to what is alive in the present. Living in alignment does not mean mastering every thought or emotion. It means knowing where to remain. Remaining as the awareness that observes keeps energy ordered. Thoughts will come, emotions will stir, impulses will arise, yet the consciousness that witnesses them need not be carried away. That witnessing is the anchor, the unmoving point from which life can unfold without distortion. True transformation does not lie in reshaping the mind, but in ceasing to grant it power it was never meant to hold. As the silent center becomes recognized as the most stable ground of experience, everything around you begins to realign, not by accident, but because there is finally space for harmony to emerge. Thank you for walking this path with me. If this message touched you, consider liking and subscribing to the channel, and share it with someone who might need its light. I'd love to hear your reflections and experiences in the comments below. Your presence here matters. Take care, and until next time, remain in the quiet strength of awareness.